Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we are going to be tackling a relationship that is, well, it's definitely fascinating, and I think it's safe to say it's pretty complicated
Oh,
too.
definitely complicated.
Yeah, we're talking about the relationship between Donald Trump and Narendra Modi.
Okay.
And to help us kind of break it all down, we've got two sources.
Here.
One is Trump and Modi, decoding the dynamics, and that one is really focused on the political moves and maneuvers.
I see.
And then we've also got Unmasking Development, USAID in India, which takes a more critical look at USAID in India.
Makes sense.
And I think you might be surprised how these two kind of seemingly separate topics actually end up connecting.
Oh, yeah.
Get ready for some geopolitical intrigue for sure.
I am ready. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? We hear about the bromance between Trump and Modi, but I feel like there's always got to be a lot more beneath the surface.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like that Howdy Modi rally in Houston.
Oh, yeah, back in 2019, right?
Yeah, like 50,000 Indian Americans all cheering them on. It was quite a spectacle.
Yeah. Talk about a spectacle, yeah.
So was that all just for show, or was there like real substance to their relationship?
Well, I think you have to remember that both of these leaders are really masters of like political theater. They both understand how to use symbolism and that strongman image to appeal to their base.
Yeah.
So on one level, yeah, the rally was a brilliant display of this shared ideology and political strategy.
Okay, but it wasn't all just for show, right? I mean, they did make some deals, like defense deals, they talked trade, and they both seemed to agree that China was a major competitor.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, both Trump and Modi saw and continue to see China as a rising threat, especially in terms of like economics and technology.
Yeah.
So that shared concern formed a strong foundation for them to build a partnership.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to remember that Trump's America First policy often clashed with what India wanted to do economically. Like, for example, when he put those tariffs on Indian steel and aluminum, that really hurt Indian exporters.
Right, and then India hit back with their own tariff.
Exactly.
That doesn't sound very bromancy to me.
Yeah, not really.
And then there are also times when Trump would, like, openly mock Modi's speaking style.
Oh, yeah.
What was up with that?
Well, I mean, I think it just shows that their relationship, both then and now, is very transactional. They might have a personal connection, but ultimately, like, national interest and political maneuvering are what's at the heart of it all.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, Modi was noticeably quiet when Trump was going through all those legal troubles after he left office.
That's true. Like, if they were such good buddies, wouldn't you expect at least a little bit more public support?
I think so.
It makes you wonder what will happen if Trump wins again in 2024.
Yeah.
He already promised he'd solve the H-1B visa mess, which is a huge issue for Indian tech workers.
Oh, the H-1B visa. Yeah. If you follow the tech world at all, you know how important this is. These visas allow U.S. companies to hire skilled workers from abroad, and a huge chunk of those workers are Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Trump changing the rules on that could really shake things up, both for those Indian workers and for a lot of those huge U.S. tech companies.
Right, so a Trump-Modi reunion in 2024 could mean anything from increased cooperation against China to renewed trade wars.
Yeah, for sure.
And don't forget, Modi himself is up for re-election that year. So he's got to juggle all this: domestic pressures, international alliances, and now a potential Trump comeback on top of everything.
Yeah, Modi's in a tricky spot for sure.
Definitely.
I mean, he wants to keep India strategically independent, but he also needs to keep those relationships with countries like the U.S. strong.
Yeah.
Think of it like he's playing a big game of chess.
Oh, okay.
He's trying to make the best moves for India on a global board.
Right. Okay, so we've got this really complex Trump-Modi dynamic, but how does U.S. aid to India fit into all of this? Our second source, Unmasking Development, dives into this, and it definitely doesn't shy away from controversy.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, what's crucial to remember is that foreign aid is never purely altruistic.
Right.
There are always political and economic interests involved.
Yeah, always some strings attached.
Exactly. So this book takes us back to the Green Revolution in the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
This is when USAID was encouraging India to adopt chemical farming.
Right.
And initially, it did boost crop yields, but did it really help in the long run?
Yeah, that's a great example of how even good intentions can end up backfiring.
Yeah.
Like, sure, the Green Revolution increased food production in the short term, but it also led to some pretty serious soil degradation.
Wow.
And a lot of farmers ended up in debt, and then there were all the widespread health issues from pesticide use.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it's a reminder that any development initiatives really need to consider those long-term consequences.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the book also claims that some of the USAID aid programs, especially those in healthcare, might have actually benefited American pharmaceutical companies more than they benefited the Indian people.
Yeah, and that's a pretty common criticism of foreign aid in general, that it can create dependency and even stifle local industries.
Okay.
Like, take India's generic drug industry. I mean, it's booming right now,
Yeah.
and it provides affordable medicine to so many people around the world.
Yeah.
But USA, especially with their HIV/AIDS programs, sometimes pushes for importing generic drugs from US companies instead,
Uh-huh.
which could end up undercutting India's own pharmaceutical sector.
So it's not as simple as like the U.S. is helping India, right?
Yeah.
It's more like this web of competing interests where both countries are trying to get the best deal.
Exactly. And I think this tension is even more evident when you look at USAID's involvement in things like the counterterrorism programs in Kashmir and Northeast India, where they've been funding some pretty controversial surveillance technologies.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, are these programs really about promoting development, or is there something else going on?
Right.
Unmasking development definitely doesn't hold back. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd even suggest that some of USAID's climate change initiatives, while appearing to be positive, could actually be pushing American technology over cheaper and potentially more suitable Indian options.
Yeah, and again, it all boils down to the question of who really benefits most from these initiatives.
Right.
Are they truly serving India's needs? Or are they mostly about advancing U.S. interests?
And that's where things get really interesting to me.
Yeah.
Like, we have to ask, can the U.S. and India ever really be true partners? Or are their goals just too different? What do you think?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And it's one that plays out in all sorts of ways, even down to specific initiatives.
So give me an example. Where do we see this dynamic, this like U.S. versus India thing playing out like on the ground?
Well, unmasking development goes into this case study that I thought was pretty revealing. It's this program called the Millennium Alliance, and it's funded by USA. And basically what it does is it supports like grassroots innovation in India.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, you would think, right? Like helping these Indian entrepreneurs get their ideas off the ground.
Yeah, totally. Like, what could be wrong with that?
Well, the book argues that while the Millennium Alliance does help some Indian entrepreneurs, it really prioritizes partnerships with U.S. corporations.
Okay.
So then the question becomes, is this really about fostering Indian innovation?
Right.
Or is it more about, creating opportunities for American companies to kind of get a foothold in the Indian market?
That makes you think. It's like what we were saying about USA state potentially hurting India's generic drug industry.
Yeah.
Like, could these well-intentioned initiatives actually be holding back the growth of like these homegrown Indian businesses?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And it's one that the book really explores in depth. It challenges us to look beyond the surface and ask these tough questions about the motivations behind all these programs.
Right. So it's like this constant balancing act.
Yeah.
The U.S. wants to help India, but it also wants to protect its own interests. And India wants to accept that help, but it doesn't want to become reliant or lose control of its own development.
Exactly. It's this complex geopolitical dance. And there just isn't like an easy answer. And unmasking development actually includes a lot of different voices from people who've experienced this all firsthand. And their perspectives, I think, are really eye-opening.
Yeah, give me an example. Like, what are some of the things people are saying about the impact of USAID, like, on the ground?
Well, one quote that really stuck with me was from this activist who was saying that a lot of times these USAID projects, they just ignore like local knowledge.
Good.
Like they might build a school without even thinking about if there are enough qualified teachers to staff it.
Right.
Or a hospital without making sure there are enough doctors, to actually work there.
So it's like they're focused on just checking boxes.
Exactly.
Like, look, we built a school without actually thinking about the long-term sustainability or if it even meets the needs of the community.
Right. Exactly. And then there was another quote. This one was from a former USAID contractor.
Okay.
And he was claiming that a lot of times the focus is really just on spending the money,
Really?
not necessarily on achieving a meaningful impact.
Wow. That's a pretty harsh critique. It makes you wonder if the whole development industry is more concerned with, like, justifying its own existence than with actually empowering communities and creating change that lasts.
It's a provocative thought, and it's definitely one that the book encourages us to think about. And it actually ties back to our earlier conversation about the overall U.S.-India relationship.
You mean like how India is trying to walk this tightrope
Exactly.
between maintaining those strategic partnerships with countries like the U.S. while also asserting its independence on the world stage.
Exactly. As India continues to grow economically and politically, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how it redefines its relationship with the U.S. Will it move away from like aid dependency
Right.
and more towards a partnership that's more equal and based on mutual respect and those shared interests?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think it goes beyond just like the government-to-government level. We also have to think about like the people-to-people connections,
Yeah.
like cultural exchange, collaborations in areas like science and tech and education.
Absolutely. It's such a multifaceted relationship, and I think to really understand where it's headed, we have to be looking at it from all these different angles.
Right.
And the sources we've been looking at, they offer, I think, a valuable starting point for that kind of nuanced analysis.
Okay, so before we jump into the final part of this deep dive, let me ask you this. What stands out to you as like the most important takeaway so far? What should our listener be really thinking about? I think for me, it's that tension between collaboration and competition.
Yeah.
On one hand, the U.S. and India, they really seem to need each other,
Right.
especially with, China being such a huge presence.
Yeah.
But then there's also this sense that each country is kind of trying to, like, outmaneuver the other,
Yeah.
whether it's in trade deals or through these aid programs.
Yeah.
It's like they're partners and rivals all at the same time.
You hit the nail on the head. That's such a great observation. And it really highlights the complexity of this relationship. And I think looking ahead, that tension is only going to increase.
Yeah.
I mean, India is a rising power, and it's not going to settle for being second to anyone, even an ally like the U.S.
So where do we go from here? How does this actually play out, like, on the global stage?
Well, let's start with the big one, China.
Okay.
As we've seen, both the U.S. and India see China as a major challenge strategically. And that shared concern has really been a driving force behind this growing partnership.
Yeah.
I think we can expect to see more cooperation on security and defense issues.
Like what?
Things like joint military exercises, intelligence sharing, maybe even more coordinated action in the Indo-Pacific region.
Okay, so it's not just about containing China.
Right.
There's that whole economic dimension to this relationship, too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, India is a massive market, and obviously American companies are super eager to tap into that growing middle class.
Yeah.
And India sees the U.S. as this source of investment, technology, and innovation. But as we talked about, there are those potential pitfalls.
Right.
If this economic partnership isn't managed really carefully, it could lead to dependency or even exploitation.
So it sounds like both countries need to be really strategic,
For sure.
maybe even a little cautious as they move forward. What else should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, trade is always a potential flashpoint.
Okay.
You remember those tit-for-tat tariffs we were talking about?
Yeah.
That kind of thing could easily happen again, especially if certain political figures are in power.
Right. And even if, like, things stay pretty calm on the trade front, there are still bound to be disagreements. I mean, the U.S. and India don't see eye to eye on everything.
True. Issues like climate change and intellectual property rights, those are areas where the two countries have really different perspectives and priorities.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see how they handle these differences going forward.
Yeah. And there's another layer to all of this, too.
Oh, yeah.
The whole issue of democracy and values.
Yeah, right.
The U.S. sees itself as this champion of democracy.
Uh-huh.
While India's record on that front, I mean, it's been a bit more complicated lately.
Yeah, that's true. That difference in values could create some tension, especially if the U.S. starts to feel like India's kind of, backsliding on those democratic principles.
Right.
But we also have to remember that India is a vast and diverse democracy,
Yeah,
facing its own unique challenges.
for sure.
It's trying to balance economic development with democratic consolidation, which, it's not always easy.
So with all these complexities, how do we even begin to imagine what the future holds for U.S.-India relations?
Right.
Any predictions?
Well, I'm no fortune teller.
Yeah.
But I do think it's safe to say that this relationship is going to continue to be this mix of cooperation and competition, with both countries trying to find that, that sweet spot where their interests align.
And it's a relationship that really does have this global impact.
Right.
Whatever happens between the U.S. and India is going to, ripple out across the world,
Right.
especially in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region.
Right. And it's a good reminder that these aren't just like abstract geopolitical issues.
Yeah.
They have real world consequences for people's lives.
Wow.
Whether it's, an Indian tech worker hoping to get an H-1B visa or a farmer struggling with the legacy of the Green Revolution.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big takeaway for our listeners is that the U.S.-India relationship is dynamic, it's complex, and it's constantly evolving.
For sure. And it's definitely a relationship that deserves our attention.
Yeah.
Because it's shaping the world we live in, both right now and in the years to come.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
We hope you found it insightful. And we'll be back soon with another exploration of the forces that are shaping our world.